Welcome to my tales of the paranormal. Hello, folks, and welcome to another set of spooky tales with the Leprechaun. Now, most stories you hear involve disembodied spirits interacting in an environment or directly with people. But there are those that believe that sometimes objects themselves can become possessed or even become conduits for spirit activity. And I suppose these next few stories, that's exactly what they're about. Now, these next few stories all take place in the same location and roughly around the same time period, but they are in no particular order. The first is about a doll. I know, cliche, but that's what happened in this story. My sister had gotten a doll one year. I can't remember if it was for her birthday or for Christmas, although her birthday's in December, so it's hard to distinguish what gifts she gets for which. This particular gift was a life-size child doll. It actually closely resembled a more familiar doll from horror fiction, but it was not the same. I don't recall what this particular doll was called. It was a boy dressed in overalls with a red shirt. At any rate, the doll spooked my brother out very badly. Now, at this point in time, none of us had ever seen horror movies. Our mother was very strict about that. So we knew nothing of the entire franchise of films centering around a possessed doll. But my brother would have nightmares about this doll killing us and killing him. Now, that in itself is not very spooky. It's not very hard for a child to have nightmares about something which spooks them. But where things started to catch our attention is when the doll started appearing in random places. One instance, my brother was quite upset and blamed my sister and I for placing the doll in his bedroom. I, of course, knew that I didn't put the doll in there, and my sister maintained that she had nothing to do with it. Still, my sister and I got scolded, and our mother treated it as if we had actually placed the doll in that room. The doll was put back in my sister's room, and we didn't think much more of it until a day or two later. We had been out and we came home and found the doll in the hallway. Our rooms were lined up consecutively, and there was a hallway that passed by each of them. The doll was in the middle of the floor. As far as we could recall, nobody had touched this doll. Nobody had moved it. We pretty much dismissed this, as did our mother, as somebody had just played with the doll, forgot, and left it laying. The next night, the doll again had appeared in my brother's room. Only this night, my brother, my sister, and my mother all had very similar nightmares involving this doll. My mother had decided this was the last straw and decided to get rid of the doll. Now, what she actually did with it, I do not know. Where it went, I can't say. Maybe she threw it away. Maybe she gave it away. I have no clue. But as soon as the doll left the house, the nightmares all stopped. I know, short story, but I was a child, and there's not a lot I can recall of it. Now, the next one involves another toy. We had all three gotten these clown toys. They were wind up, and when you would wind them up, the head would rotate as it played a musical tune. Now, these particular clown dolls with their rotating heads and music, to me, weren't very creepy at all. They were pretty inane. They didn't bother me one bit. But I didn't really play with mine, as it just didn't interest me. So it sat on a shelf for a long, long time without ever being touched. I remember one night having a dream about this particular clown coming to life and talking to me, telling me how it was going to slaughter my family and myself, which freaked me out. My mother assured me that this was simply a dream, an overactive imagination, and I should pretty much ignore it. One day while I was playing in my room, I all of a sudden started hearing a musical tune. I looked up to the shelf where this clown was, and its head was rotating and turning. I immediately jumped up and ran downstairs, found my mom, and told her what was happening. Again, she dismissed it all, stating that the doll was simply still wound and unwinding, or that somebody must have wound it up recently. I knew nobody had wound it up recently, and it seemed pretty far-fetched to me that there was still any tension on the springs that caused the doll to rotate and play music, as it had not been touched in so long. But she was pretty convincing, so I decided to ignore it. A couple days later, I'm again playing in my room. I'm sitting on the floor just in front of the shelf where the clown was, when all of a sudden it fell right in front of my face. Just dropped right off the shelf, as if somebody had pushed it over. There was no one else in the room with me, and there was really nothing on the other side of the wall that could have knocked it off. Nothing to vibrate. There was no access from the wall. So there was no way anybody, any person, had in any way manipulated this toy. That freaked me out. But I knew my mom wasn't going to do anything about it, so I just threw it on the shelf and threw a blanket or something over it. Decided to forget about that toy. I think it was the next night, maybe. My mom was tucking us in, and all of a sudden the music started and the doll fell off the shelf. It actually landed upright in a sitting up position, the head turning and the music playing. It wasn't a slow jerky movement as if it was tension slowly releasing. It was going as if somebody had turned the key and wound it up fully. Now my mom had the proof she needed. And I had told her about the incident with it falling off in front of me, so she got rid of the doll. Again, I don't know what happened to that. I never saw it again, and we never really talked about it again after that. The next item was also one of my items. This one not a toy. I had a radio alarm clock cassette player combo that was given to me, I believe, for a birthday. And I used it for the longest time. I would play my favorite cassette tapes on it, listen to the radio. I used the alarm on it, I would say, for a good year or two, probably, that I used it. And then it kind of became obsolete, and I unplugged it and just left it in a corner of my room where I had a newer, more modern alarm clock now. Now, this was about the time that CDs had just started becoming popular. So, my new alarm clock also had a CD player on it, which is why I stopped using the one with the cassette tape player. It was outdated. I remember a couple times hearing weird sounds in my room, but never figuring out where they came from. They were brief, just short, muffled bursts of sound. I would search and search, looking around all over my room, trying to find what possibly could make that noise, and never found anything. I even investigated the alarm clock that had been sitting over in the corner. It was unplugged, it was switched off, so clearly it couldn't be making any sound. This went on for a couple weeks, and then one day my mother was in my room to put away some laundry while I was away at school. Now, while she was in there, placing clothes into my dresser, she suddenly heard a burst of sound, not too loud, but loud enough to startle her. It didn't stop right away, and she was able to discern it was coming from my alarm clock radio that had been sitting in the corner of my room. But as she picked it up, the sound stopped. It stopped playing. None of the switches were flipped on, so it shouldn't have been making any sound just on that. But worse yet, she discovered it wasn't even plugged in. There was no power going to this. When I came home from school, I found my mother in the kitchen freaked out, and she related to me what had happened to her and explained that she had discarded my alarm clock radio. I was a little disappointed by this. I actually liked having it even though I didn't use it. And I didn't understand her irrational fear of it, as it never did anything malevolent. But I felt she was most likely warranted, as I was still very much influenced in my beliefs by my mother's beliefs at this time. And of course, anything paranormal had to be from the devil. I recounted my tales of what had occurred, the sounds I kept hearing in my room, and how I never figured out what it was, and I summarized that it had to have been the alarm clock. After it was gone, the sounds did stop, and I never had any issues with any other objects, at least not personal objects. I think it must have been a couple years later. One night I had a particularly disturbing dream. I dreamt that I was out on one of my babysitting gigs and had just gotten off. As we were heading home, the atmosphere kept changing. It felt heavier and darker. Even the light didn't look quite right. It was almost like there was a veil you couldn't see, blocking the light from truly shining well. The air felt heavy, almost as if there was high humidity, but there was no wetness to it. It was dry. And I got an uneasy feeling in my stomach as we pulled into the drive. I saw a vehicle that I didn't recognize. Oddly enough, it was a classic vehicle, although now I couldn't tell you what make or model. As I got out of the van that had dropped me off, I slowly crept to the house. I peered in through a window to see what looked like monsters all over the place, holding my family hostage. They were going through drawers and cupboards, tearing things apart, shouting to each other. It was clear they were looking for something. I didn't want to get caught, so I snuck around and snuck in through a window to try to free my family. As I was cutting away their ropes, one of these monstrous creatures caught sight of me and immediately alerted the others. They jumped and were on me before I could react, grabbing me and tying me up. They seemed to think that I, of everybody, was most dangerous to their plans, whatever that was, that I had some ability to stop them. They drugged me to the car and threw me into the passenger side. The creature that was their leader, at least seemingly their leader, started to get into the driver's side of the vehicle and then stopped. He said he needed to get something to be able to finish their plan. He didn't indicate exactly what it was, but somehow I knew where he was going. Now, a little bit of backstory here, real quick. Our property had a two-story house. It was a small acreage, and behind the house was a trailer. And a close family friend was renting that trailer. Everybody that knew him called him Pop. He was very well known in the town nearby where we lived. We lived in a rural area outside of the town. He was a very nice guy, very caring guy. He also was Native American and did follow his ancestral beliefs, although he still also followed Christian beliefs. The monstrous creatures began to head from the cars towards the trailer. I knew I had to act fast, but I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, just that I had to stop them. I jumped out of the vehicle as they had left the door sitting open and began to run. Somehow the ropes that were tight around my wrist just came free and fell. At that moment I realized that a talisman had appeared in my hand, and I ran with all the speed I could muster. I remember striking the leader of these beasts as I walked past him and ran up to the trailer. I don't know how I knew that's where I had to go, but somehow I did. And I remember him screaming. It was a very eerie sound. It wasn't like a normal scream. There was some kind of a guttural growl to it at the same time as a high-pitched scream. And I remember just feeling like what I needed to do was take this talisman and put it against the trailer on the door. So I did. And as soon as I did, the trailer burst into flames, the creature still screaming. I turned around to see that one by one, all of these monsters were vanishing into a puff of black smoke. I awoke for school, went down to the kitchen to find my mom, my stepdad, and Pop all sitting around the kitchen table drinking coffee as they did every day. Pop was also reading the newspaper, and so was my stepdad. Now, it was custom for me also to get a cup of coffee, bowl of cereal, sit at the table, and talk with the adults. I always really enjoyed spending time with the adults, more so than kids my age. I got my coffee and my bowl of cereal and sat down. And before I started eating, I remember saying, "Wow, I had a dream last night." Of course, the adults were interested, and I don't remember who, but somebody asked what about. And so I recounted my tale to them in vivid detail. I remember seeing Pop's face shift. A look of concern came over it. I just stared and watched him for a moment as he looked up at both my mom and my stepdad and said, "I know what that is." when you get home from school tonight, and now his gaze turned towards me, you're going to help me destroy something. I was completely puzzled and had no clue what was going on or what that meant. But I trusted Pop, so I didn't dig, and I ate my breakfast, drank my coffee, and then went to the school bus stop with my siblings. We would wait at the end of our driveway for the bus to pick us up and then take us to school in the nearby town. I couldn't get the events out of my mind as I went through my school day, but I managed to make a good effort and act as if nothing was weighing on me. I did my schoolwork, participated in my classes, did my lessons, etc. I was quite anxious as the school bus got closer and closer to home, wondering in my mind what exactly I was in store for, what my dream had meant, and what exactly were we destroying and how. As the bus pulled up and we got off, I could see to the yard. There was an area where we frequently would burn things, wood, plants, and such, to put the ash into our garden. And I could see that wood was set up to start a fire, and I could see Pop. He had apparently just finished setting up the wood. I walked down the drive towards the house and started to head up the yard. He was already heading my direction. He met me part way, put his hand on my shoulder, said, "Go ahead and take your stuff inside and meet us back out here." I took my backpack and my school supplies into the house and dropped them off on the couch, and then went outside to meet my stepdad, my mother, and Pop. My siblings followed too, as they were quite curious what was going on. We gathered around the burn area and he lit the fire. As the fire was starting to build, he told us that a friend of his had checked out a book at the local library in the town nearby that was supposed to be about Native American shamanism. But Pop, being a Native American and always being skeptical about information, had wanted to read the book for himself first before his friend did, to decide whether the information was accurate or not. As it turned out, the book was not about traditional Native American shamanism, but actually about more sinister practices, ones that were actually forbidden among the Native Americans, as they were considered evil in their rituals. He didn't elaborate as to what all the book detailed, just that it wasn't real shamanism, and that the book was evil, and that my dream indicated we needed to destroy that book by fire to cleanse. I remember once the fire built and he finished explaining this, I had goosebumps all up my arms and my back. He pulled out the book and we opened it and began trying to tear pages out of the book so that we could burn the pages in smaller sections to ensure that everything would burn thoroughly. I remember the book being difficult to tear apart. It was almost like it wasn't really made of paper, but something more sturdy. I also remember each time we tried to throw some pages into the fire, the wind would kick up to blow the fire in an opposite direction from where we were placing the pages, or the fire would suddenly flare at us, almost as if something was trying to prevent us from burning this book. All the while, Pop kept saying a prayer in his native language, and we continued our efforts until finally every part of the book had gone into the fire. We continued to stand around as everything burned down to ash. I remember him concluding the prayer in his native language. And as he did, I remember seeing a hawk start to fly into view off to my left, just out of my peripheral. Pop was standing directly to my left, facing straight across. There was no way he could have seen the hawk. But I recall him still staring at the fire as he said, "It is done. The hawk is the symbol." I was very intrigued by this. The hawk had made no sound, and as I said, there was no way he could have seen it. I concluded that it had to have been his Native American spiritualism that allowed him to know the hawk was there, and of course, the ritual we were doing, burning the book. After we destroyed that book completely, I never again had similar nightmares, and never had any other instances. In fact, I don't recall anything else happening for quite some time as far as the paranormal. So there you have it. 4 tales about 4 objects seemingly connected to the paranormal. Now, were spirits using these objects as conduits to project themselves into our realm? Or had these objects been already possessed by some energy? Did somebody somewhere perform some sort of ritual to embed these energies into them? Or was it all just coincidences and overactive imaginations? Now, before I end this video, I just want to give a quick little update. In my previous video, I mentioned happenings in my apartment. Well, that's the apartment I currently live in. And as it turns out, the activity's not quite done. This morning, as I was in my room getting dressed for the day, I noticed my TV was glowing. I had had my back to it, so I didn't actually see it turn on. But as I turned, I realized there was a glow. I turned myself fully to face it and realized that it was not only on, but it had gone into ambient mode and pulled up a picture. It's a nice, lovely picture that I enjoy, but not only did I not turn my TV on, I didn't put it in ambient mode. In fact, the last mode I had the TV in was I had a YouTube app opened on it. For a moment, I thought maybe somebody messed with my TV via the Wi-Fi. But then it occurred to me, well, that's not really possible because my Wi-Fi at that moment was down while I was uploading some updates. There was no Wi-Fi signal. So there's no explanation for how the TV turned on. The remote was near me, but I'm certain I didn't sit on it, put my hand on it, or otherwise. I just don't know. I can't explain why the TV turned on. I can't explain why it was set to ambient mode. The best explanation I have is that it must be the spirit messing with my stuff yet again. I have tried making contact with the spirit or energy that dwells here with me, to no success. And as of yet, nothing malevolent has happened. Although I am once again missing something that has seemingly vanished into thin air. Hopefully that returns. Usually these items do within a week or two. One time an item didn't return for probably a month and a half-ish, but they eventually always return. Of course, if this energy ever does turn malevolent, I will deal with it, as I have performed blessings, cleansings, purifications, etc. And pretty well have the ritual for that down pat. Anyway, I think that's enough for this video. So, until next time.
Stay spooky.